Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into our exploration of Rudolf Steiner's Building Stones for an Understanding of the Mystery of Golgotha. We are on lecture 10, the final one, so we're doing the wrap up today. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find enjoyment in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology or you just do not understand where I am coming from, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of why I stand where I do and say those things that piss you off. With that being said, we are going to dive back into the building stones for the understanding of a Mystery of Golgotha, Lecture 10, May 8th, 1917, Berlin. It may seem at first sight that in the centuries immediately following the Mystery of Golgotha, mankind had not been touched by the light of spiritual illumination. That this was the normal condition of mankind and increasingly so up to the present day. This is not so, however. If we wish to see these things in perspective, we must distinguish between the prevailing spirit of mankind and that which occurs here and there in the life of mankind, and may play a decisive part in the different spheres of his life. It would be most discouraging for many today to be told of the existence of a spiritual world, but that the doors of this world were closed to them, and there are many at the present time who have come to this depressing conclusion. The reason for this is not far to seek. Where there is a clear possibility of gaining insight into the spiritual world, they refuse to commit themselves unreservedly, nor have they the courage to pass an objective judgment on this issue. It may seem, therefore, but in reality is only apparently so, that today we are far removed from those early times when the spiritual world was revealed to the whole of mankind through atavistic clairvoyance, or from the later times when the few could find access to the spirit through the initiation into the mysteries. We must draw together certain strands which link early periods of human evolution with the present, if we wish to arrive at a full understanding of the mystery of man's destiny, and especially of those phenomena we have discussed in these lectures in connection with the nature of the mysteries. I should like to select an example from recent times which is accessible to all and which will lend encouragement to those who are faced with the decision of choosing paths leading to the spiritual world. From the many examples at our disposal, I would like to take an example which demonstrates at the same time how those phenomena are nonetheless misjudged from the materialistic point of view of the present day, and will also be misjudged in the immediate future. No doubt you have all heard of Otto Ludwig. We're going to open that up. Otto Ludwig, 1813-65, was best known for his realist novels Der Obforster and Zwischen Himmel und Erde, genre painting with careful observation of detail. He coined the term poetischer Realismus. His Shakespeare Studium showed preoccupation with dramatic theory. During his process of poetic creation, he experienced a spectrum of colors and forms known as synesthesia. We're going to go ahead and hit note 2 because it is synesthesia. Had been foreshadowed by E.P.A. Hoffman in Kreisliania. The hearing of a word or sound evokes a sensation of color varying in accordance with the quality of the sound. C.F. Baudelaire's Sonnet Correspondances, Les Parfums de les Colors et les Sons se Répondant, and Rimaud's Sonnets Voyez, in which a definite color value is ascribed to each of the 5 vowels. F. W. H. Meyer describes synesthesia as follows. When the hearing of an external sound carries with it, by some arbitrary association of ideas, the seeing of some form or color. Otto Ludwig, who was born in 1813 in the same year as Hebel and Richard Wagner. Otto Ludwig was not only a poet. Some of us may feel perhaps that he was not in the front rank of poets, but that does not concern us at the moment. But he was a man given to introspection, who sought self-knowledge, and who succeeded in penetrating into the inner life which is veiled from the majority today. Otto Ludwig describes very beautifully what he experiences in the process of poetic composition, or when he reads the poetry of others and surrenders to its appeal. He then realizes that he does not read or compose like other men, but that an extraordinary ferment is set up within him. And Otto Ludwig gives a beautiful description of this in a passage I will now read to you, because it reveals a piece of self-knowledge of a typically modern man, who, in the course of this self-revelation, speaks of things which our present materialistic age regards as the wildest fantasy. But Otto Ludwig is no visionary or idle dreamer. By nature, he was perhaps introspective, but if we take into consideration the information we have about his life, we shall find that alongside this introspective tendency there was something eminently sane and balanced in his makeup. He describes his own creative experience and his response to the poetry of others in these words. I experience, first of all, a musical impression which is transformed into color. Then I see one or more figures in various postures, executing formalized gestures, singly or facing each other, the whole resembling a copper engraving on parchment, colored paper, or, more precisely, like a marble statue or sculptural group on which the sun falls through a veil of that color. I experience this color phenomena after reading poetry which has stirred me deeply. If I put myself in the mood which Goethe's poetry evokes, I see a deep golden yellow passing over into golden brown. When I read Schiller, I experience a brilliant crimson. With Shakespeare, every scene is a particular nuance of the particular color I associate with the whole drama. Strangely enough, the image or group evoked is not usually a representation of the denouement. Sometimes it is only a characteristic figure in some moving posture which is immediately joined by a succession of other figures. At first, I knew nothing of the plot or content of the drama, but ever fresh miming figures, seemingly three-dimensional, are rapidly added, now from the beginning, now from the end of the initial dramatic situation, until I experience the whole drama, complete with all its scenes. The whole passes before me in rapid succession. Meanwhile, I remain passive, and a kind of physical anxiety grips me. I can then reproduce at will the content of the individual scenes as they unfold. But I find it impossible to condense the narrative content into a brief account. Next, the gestures are accompanied by speech. I write down what I can recall, but once the mood forsakes me, what I have noted down becomes dead letter. Then I proceed to fill in the gaps in the dialogue, but for this purpose I must cast a critical eye over what I have written. Hence, then, we have a remarkable case of a man who experiences crimson red on reading Schiller, or golden yellow passing over into golden brown on reading the dramas or poems of Goethe, who experiences a color sensation with every drama of Shakespeare, who, when he composes or reads a poem, sees figures like those of a copper engraving printed on parchment-colored background, or three-dimensional miming figures on which the sun falls through a veil which diffuses the light that evokes the total mood. Now, we must understand this experience in the correct way. It is not yet a clairvoyant perception, but it is a step towards spiritual vision. In order to have a right understanding of this mood, from the standpoint of spiritual science, we must realize that Otto Ludwig was no stranger to spiritual vision. For if he were to advance further along this path, he would not only experience these visions, but, just as physical objects are visible to the physical eye, spiritual beings would be visible to his spiritual eye, and he would know them as an inner experience. Just as we see scattered light when we gently rub our eyes in the dark, light that seemingly radiates from the eye and fills the room, so from his inner life Ludwig radiates impressions of color and tone. I am going to point out that the light does in fact emanate from your eyes. As he rightly says, he experiences them first as musical impressions. He does not exploit them in order to gain spiritual insight, but we perceive that he is mature enough spiritually to embark on the path leading to the spiritual world. It is no longer possible to deny that there exist people who are aware that spiritual vision is a reality. the vision that the neophytes learned to develop in the mysteries in the way that it described in earlier lectures. For the real purpose of these ceremonies was primarily to call attention to the eye of the soul, to awaken man to the fact of its existence. That the phenomena which I have just described to you are not rightly understood today is evident from the observations of Gustav Freytag. That is note 3. Let's pop that out and see. Freytag, 1816-95, author of realistic novels which extol the virtues of a German middle class. Soul and Heaven die ein. When speaking of Otto Ludwig, he says, "The work of this writer, indeed, his whole make-up, was akin to that of an epic poet of the time when, in the early dawn of the nations, the poetic figures were visioned by the poet as living imaginations imbued with color and sound." This statement is perfectly correct, but has nothing to do with poetic composition. For the experiences of Otto Ludwig were not only shared by poets in ancient times, but by all men. That is an extrapolation, and were shared in later times by those who have been initiated into the mysteries, irrespective of whether they were poets or not. This is born from the thought that everybody thinks in the same manner, and that is not true. Like we have talked before about aphantasia, which is what I had. I am in the process of overcoming, but for the entirety of my life, I have not been able to close my eyes and visualize anything. Other people can. Some people experience the physical in different ways, naturally. That doesn't mean that you can't develop some extra senses. You can. You can see the subtle fields. I can see the subtle fields. But that doesn't mean that everybody will be able to achieve that, but that it is available. You can train yourself to do these things. Aphantasia is something that I am overcoming. For the first time in my life in the last couple of weeks, I have been able to imagine the color red. That is something new for me. Or change the color red into the color yellow, which is also something new for me. Other people can do that at will and have been able to their entire life. A large part of our problem in the current era and all throughout history is not understanding that people see things in different ways. Part of what I do in the MBTI parts deal with that exclusively, but it is also part of the Infinite Integrations playlist, is to try to show people that there are different ways of processing and giving back information, right? You receive different information from different things. Like, I can say the sentence, there is a shiny new red car, right? And 4 different people are going to pull 4 different things from that. One person is going to focus on the shiny, one is going to focus on new, one is going to focus on red, and one is going to be simply that there is a car. Each one of those people takes something different from the same sentence. That is what the MBTI stuff is, to help you to identify about yourself, so that you can understand, first and foremost, other people think in different ways. If you are focused on the ideas, somebody else might be focused on the things, and you don't think the same way. You don't accept the information in the same way, you don't process it the same, and you don't return it the same way. It is different. There are 32 different ways of doing that. There are several variations within those 32 ways, right? So somebody who has the exact same type as me, an INFJ, will have a different way of seeing slightly. But we're both focused on the ideas, and we're both focused on returning those ideas basically the same. We have variations in which part of it, right? Some people are focused on, like, sense is the easier one. Some people are focused on cars, and some people are focused on music. But both of those are sensory, mostly. The practical application of music as opposed to theory. But they're both focused on the thing, right? The thing that you particularly focus on can be different from what the thing that this other person of the same type particularly focuses on. You see this in autistic people, and I say that with quotations because almost nobody is actually autistic or has ADHD or any of those diagnoses, that's brands that we see. Almost nobody has that, but we have the thought that they do because this guy gets super focused in on trains and this guy is super focused in on tractors. Well, they're both super focused in on the thing that is, and they are either the new thing or the old thing, and that's a whole different conversation that is held in other places. The point of this is that this is not necessarily something anomalous, right? It is a little bit anomalous that somebody identifies themselves that way. But different people see different things. Different people have different experiences, and different people focus on different things. So, trying to lump everybody together in the same box is what's wrong with our Department of Education. Not everybody is designed to go to college. Not everybody is designed to work in 9 to 5 for somebody else. There are a multitude of career paths, and different people are designed to fill that multitude. These experiences have therefore no connection with poetic invention. Behind the barrier which the materialist of today has erected in his own soul, there is to be found that which Otto Ludwig describes. It is not only in the poet, but in every man today. The fact that he was a poet has nothing to do with the phenomena of poetic vision, but it is something that accompanies it. One may be a far greater poet than Otto Ludwig, and that which one is able to describe may remain entirely in the subconscious. It is present in the substratum of the subconscious, but need not manifest itself. For poetry, indeed, art as a whole, today, is something other than the conscious fashioning of clairvoyant impressions. I quote the case of Otto Ludwig as an example of a man, and men of his type are by no means rare today, who stands on the threshold of the spiritual world. If one practices the exercises given in my book, Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, that which already exists in the soul is raised into consciousness so that one learns to use it or to apply it consciously. It is important to bear this in mind. The problem is not so much that it is difficult to reach the hidden depths of the soul, but that people today lack the courage to embark upon a spiritual training, and that for the most part those who would willingly do so from a heartfelt need to know and to understand, nonetheless feel constrained to admit this need, albeit somewhat shamefacedly in their own intimate circle, but conceal it when they later find themselves in the company of contemporary intellectuals. Shame and fear is a very powerful force. What we should characterize today as the right path, perhaps because we live in the Michael age since 1879, need not of a necessity be regarded as the only right path. Looking back over the recent past, it is possible that many may have attained a high degree of clairvoyance, genuine clairvoyance. There is no need for us, therefore, either to recognize fully or to accept this clairvoyance unreservedly, nor to regard it as something dangerous and to be rejected. There are many factors which for some time have undermined our courage to accept the validity of clairvoyance. For this reason, the assessment of Swedenborg, who has been mentioned in your circle, has been so strange. He could act as a stimulus to many, in that people may see him an individuality who has lifted to some extent the veils that conceal the spiritual world. Swedenborg had developed a high degree of imaginative cognition, which is a necessity for all who would penetrate to the spiritual world. It was indispensable to him. It was simply a kind of transition to higher stages of knowledge. And it was especially his clairvoyant sense for imaginative cognition that he had developed. But precisely because this imaginative cognition was stirring and pulsating in him, he was able to make observations about the relations between the spiritual world and the phenomenal world. Observations which are highly significant for those who seek to clarify their ideas about clairvoyance by studying the development of particular personalities. I should like to take Swedenborg as an example in order to illustrate how he came to self-understanding, how he thought and felt in order to keep his inner life attuned to the spiritual world. He was not motivated by egoism in his search for spirit. He was already 55 years old when the doors of the spiritual world were opened to him. And that is going to be note 4. Swedenborg, 1688 to 1772, engineer, scientist, philosopher, and theologian. In his Arcana Caelesta, he wrote, "It has been granted me now for some years to be constantly and continuously in the company of spirits and angels, hearing them speak and speaking with them in turn. It has been given to me to hear and see the wonderful things which are in the other life. I have been instructed there in regards to different kinds of spirits, the state of souls after death, and especially concerning the doctrine of faith which is acknowledged in the universal heaven." He was therefore a man of ripe experience. He had received a sound scientific training and had long been active in this field. The most important scientific works of Swedenborg have just been published in many volumes by the Stockholm Academy of Sciences, and they contain material that may well determine the course of science for many years to come. But people today have learned the trick of recognizing a man such as Swedenborg, who was the leading scientist of his day, only insofar as they agree with him. Otherwise, they label him a fool, and they perform this trick with consummate skill. They attach no importance to the fact from the age of 55, Swedenborg bears witness to the reality of the spiritual world. A man whose scientific achievement not only compasses favorably with that of others, in itself no mean feat, but who, as a scientist, stood head and shoulders above his contemporaries. Swedenborg was particularly interested in the question of the interaction of the soul and body. After his spiritual enlightenment, he wrote a superb treatise on the subject. The content was approximately as follows. In considering the interrelation of body and soul, there are 3 possibilities. First, the body is the decisive factor, since impressions are mediated by the body and react upon the soul. The soul, therefore, is to some extent dependent upon the body. The second possibility is that the body is dependent upon the soul, which is the source of the spiritual impulses. The soul fashions the body and makes use of the body during its lifetime. In this case, one must speak not of a physical influence, but of a psychic influence. The third possibility is as follows. Body and soul are contiguous, but do not interact. A higher being, a higher power brings about a harmony or agreement between them, just as 2 clocks which are independent of each other agree when they show the time. When, therefore, an external impression is made upon the senses, a thought process is set up within the soul, but both are unrelated. A corresponding impression is made upon the soul from within by a higher power, just as an impression is made upon the soul through the senses from without. Swedenborg points out that the first and third possibilities are impossible for those who are able to see into the spiritual world, that it is evident to the spiritually enlightened that the soul, by virtue of its inner forces, is related to the spiritual sun in the same way as the physical body is related to the physical sun. And he also shows that everything of a physical nature is dependent upon soul and spirit. He throws fresh light upon what we call the sun mystery, when speaking of the mysteries, that mystery of which Julian the Apostate had a dim recollection when he spoke of the sun as a spiritual being. It was this which was the cause of his hostility to Christianity, because the Christianity of his day sought to deny Christ's relation to the sun. Through imaginative cognition, Swedenborg restored the sun mystery as far as was possible in his time. Now we're going to talk, right? We talk often about the Trinity, the body, the soul, and the spirit. The body is the temple. It is the part that you navigate through 5D space. It has been given to your soul to do so by source, by creator. Creator knitted the meat. The soul is the individualized piece of you that makes the decisions. So this is the determinant factor in your life. But once you make the decision, you don't actually make it happen. That is the spirit. The spirit is the all-encompassing thing that is all. It is every single cell within you, right? You are physical. There is matter. There is the soul which makes the decisions, but the part that makes it happen, the energy invested, is the spirit. It surrounds you at all times. It is everything at once. When you breathe in, you are breathing in spirit. When you breathe out, you are exhaling spirit. When you eat, you are ingesting spirit. And it is transformed by spirit into the thing which you need. When you eat, it transforms your food into fuel. It takes what it needs and it gets rid of the rest. The soul is the part that determines your direction. It is the part that makes the decisions for the spirit to enact. And the firmer your decisions are, the more likely that is to happen. That is the process by which manifestation happens. Now, there are other processes by which I describe that happening. We talk about that in infinite integrations. About the alignment of the 7 chakras internal with the 1 external so that you can influence things in an intentional manner. But you do that whether you are intentional or not. When you wake up in the morning and you say it's going to be a shitty day, it's going to be a shitty day because you just manifested that. But if you say it's going to be a wonderful day, no matter what shit is thrown at you, it's still wonderful. That is your soul making the determination for your reality. It does so in a myriad of ways, not just in that one particular example. So if you're saying my job sucks, guess what? You influence that. You are free to choose a new one, at least here in this country. You can decide, I don't like this job anymore, I'm going to find a different one. So you can decide to change that. That happens with a myriad of things, a lot of different things. I have placed these facts before you in order to show that Swedenborg experienced inwardly in the course of developing his spiritual knowledge. His reflections upon the question I have just touched upon were embodied in a kind of philosophical treatise, the kind of treatise written by one who has insight into the spiritual world, not the kind of treatise written by the academic philosopher who is devoid of spiritual vision. At the conclusion of his treatise, Swedenborg speaks of what he calls a vision, and by this vision he does not imply something he has conjured up, but something he has actually perceived with the eye of the spirit. Swedenborg is not afraid to speak of his spiritual visions. Furthermore, he recounts what a particular angel said to him because he is certain of the fact. He no more doubts it than any other doubts what a fellow human being has told him. He said, I once was in the spirit. 3 schoolmen appeared to me, disciples of Aristotle, advocates of his doctrine that attributes a physical influence to all the streams of the soul from without. They appeared on the one side. On the other side appeared 3 disciples of Descartes, who spoke of spiritual influences upon the soul, albeit somewhat inadequately. And behind them appeared 3 disciples of Leibniz, who spoke of the pre-established harmony, an example of the interdependence of body and soul, of dissimilar monads existing and moving together in a state of absolute harmony pre-established by God. And I perceived 9 figures who surrounded me, and the leaders of each group of the 3 figures were Leibniz, Descartes, and Aristotle, suffused in light. Swedenborg spoke of this vision as one speaks of an event in everyday life. Then, he said, from out of the abyss there arose a spirit with a torch in his right hand. As he swung the torch in front of these figures, they immediately began to dispute among themselves. The Aristotelians defended, from their standpoint, the primacy of physical influences. The Cartesians defended spiritual impulses, and likewise the Leibnizians defended, with the support of Leibniz himself, the idea of pre-established harmony. Such visions may describe even the smallest details. Swedenborg tells us that Leibniz appeared dressed in a kind of toga, and the lappets were held by his disciple Wolf. Such details always accompany these visions, in which such peculiarities are very characteristic. These figures, then, begin to dispute among themselves. They all had a good case, and any and every case can be defended. Thereupon, after prolonged conflict, the spirit appeared a second time. He carried the torch in his left hand and lit up their heads from behind. When the battle of words was really joined, they said, We cannot distinguish which is our body and which is our soul. So they agreed to cast 3 slips of paper in a box. On the one slip was written physical influence, on the second spiritual influence, and on the third pre-established harmony. Then they drew lots and drew out spiritual influence and said, "Let us agree to recognize spiritual influence." At that moment an angel descended from the upper world and said, "It is not fortuitous that you drew out the slip of paper labeled spiritual influence. That choice had already been anticipated by the powers who in their wisdom guide the world because it accords with the truth." This is the vision described by Swedenborg. It is open to anyone to regard this vision as of no importance, perhaps even as naive. The salient question, however, is not whether it is naive or not, but that he experienced it. And that which at first sight seems perhaps extremely naive has profound implications. For that which in the phenomenal world appears to be arbitrary, the vagary of chance, is something totally different when seen symbolically from the spiritual angle. It is difficult to come to an understanding of chance because chance is only a shadow image of higher necessities. Swedenborg wishes to indicate something of special importance, namely, that it is not he who wills it, but it is willed in him. The vision arises because it is willed in him, and this is an accurate description of the way in which he arrived at his truths, an accurate description of the spirit in which the treatise was written. How did the Cartesians react? They sought to demonstrate the idea of spiritual influence on purely human and rational grounds. It is possible to arrive at the spirit in this way, but that seldom happens. The Aristotelians were no better than the Cartesians. They defended the idea of the spiritual influence, again on human grounds. The Leibnizians were certainly no better than the other two, for they defended the idea of pre-established harmony. Swedenborg rejected these paths to the spirit. He did everything possible to prepare himself to receive the truth. And waiting upon this truth, not the determination of truth, this passive acceptance of truth was his aim, and was symbolized by the drawing of the slips of paper from the box. This is of vital importance. We do not appreciate these things at their true worth when we approach them intellectually. We only appreciate them in the right way when they are presented symbolically, even though intelligent people may regard the symbol as naive. Our response to symbols is different from our response to abstract ideas. The symbol prepares our soul to receive the truth from the spiritual world. That is essential. And if we give a serious attention to these things, we shall gradually understand and develop ideas and concepts which are necessary for mankind today, ideas which they must acquire by effort, and which appear to be inaccessible today simply because people are antipathetic towards them, and for no other reason, an antipathy that springs from materialism. That is in large part true. You are held back by your own limitations. Failure to believe in them will produce you will not get any results if you are attempting to do this and not believing in it. The whole purpose of our investigations was to study the course of human evolution, first of all up to a decisive turning point. And this turning point was the mystery of Golgotha. Then evolution continues and takes on a new course. The two courses are radically different from each other. I have already described in what respects they differed from each other. In order to fully understand this difference, let us recall once again the following. In ancient times, it was always possible for man, without special training of his psychic life, in the mysteries, this was connected with external ceremonies and cult acts, to be convinced of the reality of the spiritual world through the performance of these rites and ceremonies, and thereby of his own immortality. Because of this certainty of immortality was still latent in his corporeal nature. After the mystery of Golgotha, it was no longer possible for the physical body to distill out of itself the conviction of immortality. It can no longer press out of itself, so to speak, the perception of immortality. This had been prepared in the centuries before the mystery of Golgotha. It is most interesting to see how Aristotle, this giant among philosophers, made every effort a few centuries before the mystery of Golgotha to grasp the idea of the immortality of the soul. but the idea of immortality arrived at was a most remarkable conception. Man, in Aristotle's opinion, was only a complete man when he possesses a physical body. And Franz Brentano, one of the best Aristotelians of the recent time, says in his study of Aristotle that man is no longer a complete man if some member is lacking. How can he be a complete man when he lacks the whole body? Therefore, to Aristotle, when the soul passes through the gates of death, it is of less significance than it was when in the body here on earth. This shows that he had lost the capacity still to perceive the soul, whilst on the other hand the original capacity to accept the immortality of the soul still persisted. That's not what that says, right? It says that what you do here is more important than returning to source. That's not untrue, right? The reason for being here is to be separated from source. And so when you return to source, that is a natural thing. Being here is the unnatural thing. It is the part we are designed to do, to live this life, to be engaged in this life. And what you do here is indeed more important than the return to source. That's going to happen regardless. Now, strange to relate, Aristotle was the leading philosopher throughout the Middle Ages. All that can be known, said the schoolman, is known to Aristotle, and as philosophers we have no choice but to rely upon him and follow in his footsteps. That's an assumption. They had no intention of developing spiritual powers or capacities beyond the limits set by Aristotelianism. And this is very significant, for it explains clearly why Julian the Apostate rejected the Christianity that was practiced by the Church during the age of Constantine. One must really see these things from a higher perspective. Apart from Franz Brentano, one of the leading Aristotelians of our time, I was personally acquainted with Vincenz Nauer, a Benedictine monk, whose relationship to Aristotle as a Roman Catholic was identical with that of the schoolman. In speaking of Aristotle, he sought to discover at the same time what could be known of the immortality of the soul by purely human knowledge. And Nauer gave the following interesting summary of his opinion. The soul, that is, in this connection, the departed spirit, in example, the soul of the man that has passed through the gates of death, finds itself, according to Aristotle, not in a more perfect state, but in a highly imperfect state, inappropriate to his destiny. The image of the soul is by no means that which is often employed, namely the image of a butterfly, which, after shedding its chrysalis, takes wing. Rather does the soul resemble a butterfly whose wings have been torn off by a cruel hand, and now crawls helplessly in the dust in the form of a miserable worm. That is patently not the truth of the situation. We have discussed that at length. I'm not going to now, but no. You return to source completely, and there is no ripping off of the wings involved. It is very significant that those who are well versed in Aristotle admit that the human knowledge could arrive at no other conclusion, and a certain effort, therefore, is demanded of us to resist the consequences of this attitude of mind. The materialism of the present time is unwittingly influenced by the conciliar decree of 869, which abolished the spirit and declared that man consisted of body and soul only. Modern materialism goes even further. It proposes to abolish the soul as well. That, of course, is the logical sequel. We need, therefore, both courage and determination in order to find our way back again to the spirit in the right way. Now, Julian the Apostate, who had been initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries, was aware that a specific spiritual training could lead to the realization that the soul is immortal. That is possible. This sun mystery was known to him, and he now became aware of something that filled him with alarm. He was unable to grasp the fact that what he feared so much was a necessity. When he looked back to ancient times, he realized that directly or indirectly, through the mysteries, man was guided by cosmic powers, beings, and forces. He realized that this may happen on the physical plane, that it is ordained from spiritual spheres, because men have insight into these spiritual spheres. In Constantinism, he saw a form of Christianity emerge which modeled Christian society and the organization of Christianity on the original principles of the Roman Empire. He saw that Christianity had infiltrated into that which the Roman Empire had intended for the external social order only. He saw that the divine spiritual had been harnessed to the Imperium Romanium, and this appalled him. He was unable to bring himself to admit that this was a necessity for a brief period. It wasn't. He realized that there was a wide disparity between the mighty impulses of human evolution and what happened historically. I have often called attention to the need to bear in mind the golden age of the rise of Christianity before the era of Constantine. For at that time, powerful spiritual impulses were at work which had been obscured solely because man's independent search for knowledge, which he owed to the Christ impulse, had been harnessed to the conciliar decrees. If we look back to Origen and to Clement of Alexandria, we find men who were open-minded, men still imbued with the Greek spirit. Yet they were also conscious of their significance, of what had been accomplished through the mystery of Golgotha. Their conception of this mystery and of the crucified Christ is considered to be pure heresy in the eyes of all denominations today. In reality, the great church fathers of the pre-Constantine age, who are recognized by the church, are the worst heretics of all. Though they were aware of the significance of the mystery of Golgotha for the evolution of the earth, they gave no indication of wishing to suppress the path of the mystery of Golgotha, and the gate to the mysteries or the path of the old clairvoyance, which had been the aim of Christianity of Constantine. In Clement of Alexandria, especially, we see that his works are shot through with great mysteries, mysteries which are so veiled that it is even difficult for contemporary man to make head or tail of them. Clement speaks of the Logos, for example, of the wisdom that streams through and permeates the universe. He pictures the Logos as music of the spheres, fraught with meaning, and the visible world as the expression of the music of the spheres, just as the visible vibration of the strings of a musical instrument is the expression of the sound waves. There's a mosquito flying around. The entirety of life is a harmonic. We are carried on the sound of creation. The Logos was the creative utterance of God. There have been, and continue to be, many misinterpretations of that, considering Christ, the person, to be Logos is a fallacy. It is not consistent with the meaning of the word. Again, I refer you to the Unconventional Bible Study. Thus, in the eyes of Clement, the human form is made in the image of Logos. That is, to Clement, the Logos is a reality, and he sees the human form as a fusion of tones from the music of the spheres. That is remarkably close to true. Man, he says, is made in the image of the Logos. Yes, and in many of Clement's utterances we find traces of that supernal wisdom that dwelt in him, a wisdom illuminated by the Christ impulse. If you compare these utterances of Clement of Alexandria with the prevailing attitude today, then the claim to recognize a man such as Clement of Alexandria without understanding him will appear as more than in passing strange. When it is said that the aim of spiritual science is to follow in the mainstream of Christianity, to be a new flowering of Christianity to meet the needs of our time, then the cry is raised. The ancient gnosis is being revived. And at the mention of gnosis, many professing Christians today begin to cross themselves as if faced by the devil incarnate. Gnosis for today is spiritual science, but the more developed gnosis of the present time is different from the gnosis known to Clement of Alexandria. What were the views of Clement of Alexandria, who lived in the latter half of the 2nd century? Faith, he says, is our starting point. The Orthodox Christian of today is satisfied with faith alone and asks no more. Faith, according to Clement, is already a knowledge, but concise knowledge of what is needed. Gnosis, however, confirms and reinforces what we believe, is founded on faith through the teaching of our Lord, and so leads to a faith that is scientifically acceptable and irrefutable. In these words, Clement of Alexandria expresses for his time what we must realize today. Christianity, therefore, demands that gnosis, the spiritual science of today, must actively participate in the development of Christianity. But the modern Philistine protests. We must distinguish between science, which he would limit to sense experience, and faith. Faith must have no part in science. Clement of Alexandria, however, says, to faith is added gnosis, to gnosis love, and to love the kingdom. This is one of the most profound utterances of the human spirit, because it bears witness to an intimate union with the life of the spirit. First, we are nourished in faith, but to faith is added gnosis, that is, knowledge, or understanding. Out of this living knowledge, i.e., when we penetrate deeply into things, there is first born genuine love, through which our divine inheritance operates. Mankind can only be the vehicle of the influx of the divine, as it was in the beginning. If to faith is added gnosis, to gnosis love, and to love the kingdom, we must look upon these utterances as bearing witness to the deep spirituality of Clement. Difficult as it may seem, we must make the true form of Christian life once again accessible to mankind today. It is important to see things for what they are today, and we shall then know where to look for the real cause of our present tribulations. An example, the War of 1914, the First World War. The effect of these calamities is such that, as a rule, no attempt is made to discover what really lies behind them. When, for example, an alpine village is buried beneath an avalanche, everyone sees the avalanche crash down. But if we want to discover the cause of the avalanche, we must look for it perhaps in an ice crystal, where the snow slip began. It is easy enough to observe the destruction of the village by the avalanche, but it is not so easy to provide tangible evidence that the disaster was caused by an ice crystal. And so it is with the great events of history. It is evident that mankind is now caught up in a terrible catastrophe. This is the conflagration that has overwhelmed us, but we have to look for the sparks, and they are many, which first set the conflagration alight. But we do not pursue our inquiries far enough in order to ascertain where the conflagration first began. Today, we are afraid to see things for what they are. Let us assume that we wish to form an opinion about a certain field of science. Usually, we rely upon the opinion of the specialist in that particular field. Why is his opinion accepted as authoritative? Simply because he is an expert in the field. Generally speaking, it is the specialist or university professor who determines what is accepted as scientific today. Let us take a concrete case. I am well aware that it does not make for popularity to call a spade, but it is no matter. But unless an increasing number of people is prepared to get to the root of things today, we shall not overcome our present tribulations. Let us assume that a leading authority says the following. People are always talking about man in terms of body and soul. This idea of the dualism of body and soul is fundamentally unsatisfactory. That we will speak of body and soul today is due to the fact that we are dependent on a language that is already outmoded, which we have inherited from an earlier epoch when people were far more stupid than today. These people were so foolish as to believe that the body and soul were separate entities. When we speak of these matters today, we are compelled to make use of these terms. We are victims of a language which belongs to the past, and our authority continues. We have to accept body and soul as separate entities, but this is quite unjustified. Anyone speaking from the present standpoint and wholly uninfluenced by the views of ancient times would perhaps say, let us assume here is a flower and here is a man. I see his form and complexion, his external aspect, just as I see that of the flower. The rest must be inferred. Now, someone might come along and object. That is true, but the man in question also sees the flower in his soul. But that is pure illusion. What I really perceive from the perception of a flower or a stone is a sense impression. and the same is true of the man in question. The idea that an inner image persists in the soul is pure illusion. The only things we know are external relationships. You will say that you can make nothing of this argument, and a good thing too, because it is a farrago of nonsense. It is the acme of stupidity. This crass stupidity is supported by all kinds of careful laboratory investigations into the human brain and sundry clinical findings and so on. In short, the man is a fool. He is in a position to provide good clinical results because laboratories are at his disposal. But the conclusion which he draws from these findings are pure nonsense. Men of this type are a commonplace today. To say these things does not make for popularity. The cycle of lectures which has appeared in book form by the man I am referring to, strangely enough, his name is Reorienting, see original note 1. I don't know that that's going to be the same. Right, let's pop it out and see what it is. Original note 1, that took us all the way to the top. That is not going to be correct. I guess we have already read it, so we're not going to again. Take this to be pure coincidental. It is called The Mechanism of the Spiritual Life. It would be about as sensible to write about as the ligneousness of iron, or about the mechanism of spiritual life. Now, if this type of intellectual acumen is our most enlightened mind, it is not in the least surprising that if those disciplines, which are far from being accurate at least in relation to external facts, and in this respect Reorienting is capable of accurate observation, because he describes what he sees, but unfortunately muddies everything with his own foolish ideas. That if those disciplines which are unsupported by external evidence, such as political science, for example, are exposed to the scientific mode of thinking, then the greatest nonsense results. Political science should be supported by thoughts that are rooted in reality, but lacks these thoughts for reasons I have indicated in my last lecture, and people are forcibly reminded of this fact. I referred earlier in this lecture to Kjelland, one of the leading Swedish thinkers. His book, The Status of Reorientism, is ingenious. Towards the end of the book, he puts forward a remarkable idea, but neither he nor others today can make anything of it. He quotes a certain Fustel de Coulanges, note 5, and that one we do have pulled up. Fustel de Coulanges, 1830 to 89, originator of the scientific approach to history. His Cité Antique showed that ancient institutions derived from religious beliefs common to primitive peoples. It was a study of the part played by religion in the political and social evolution of Greece and Rome. Author of La Cité Antique, who showed that when we analyze pre-Christian political and social institutions, we find that they are entirely founded on religious rites and observances. The entire state has a social and spiritual foundation. Thus, people are willy-nilly brought to face with the facts, for I pointed out in my last lecture that the social order stemmed from the mysteries and had a spiritual origin. In studying the body politic or political science, people are faced with these questions but are at a loss to understand them. They can make nothing of what even history reports when they can no longer rely upon documents. And still less can they make of anything of the other idea which I indicated as a new path to the Christ. This idea, which we find especially in the mysteries and in Plato's writings, that remarkable echo of the mystery teachings must arise once again. The central figure of Plato's dialogues is Socrates, surrounded by his disciples. In the debate between Socrates and his disciples, Plato unfolds his teachings. In his writings, Plato was in communion with Socrates after the latter's death. Now, this is something more than a literary device. Refer to Plato in the Ancient Lore playlist, where I talk about this exact thing. Now, this is something more than a literary device. It is the continuation, the echo of what was practiced in the mysteries, where the neophytes were gradually prepared for communion with the souls of the dead, who continue to direct the sensible world from the spiritual world. Plato's philosophy is developed out of his communion with Socrates, after the death of Socrates. This idea must be revived again, and I have already indicated what form it must take. We must get beyond the dry bones of history, beyond the mere recording of external events. We must be able to commune with the dead, to let the thoughts of the dead arise in us once again. It is in this sense that we must be able to take seriously the idea of resurrection. It is through personal inner experience that Christ reveals himself to mankind, or God. It is by following this path that the truth of the Christ can be demonstrated. But this path demands of us that we develop the will into our thinking. If we can develop only such thoughts as are suited to the observation of the external world, we cannot arrive at those thoughts which are really in touch with the dead. We must acquire the capacity to draw thoughts from the well of our inmost being. Our will must be prepared to unite with reality, and then the will which is spiritualized by its incorporation in our thinking will encounter spiritual beings. Just as the hand encounters a physical object in the external world. And the first spiritual beings we encounter will, as a rule, be the dead with whom we are in some way karmically connected. This is another one of those points that I take extreme exception to. I have expressed throughout this my distaste for communing with the dead. Right? There are entities that can imitate those beings, right? The dead that you are talking to is not necessarily the dead that you think you are talking to, and so I have distaste for that. I am attempting to begin those explorations because there are entities aligned with good, but my first spiritual encounter was with the source. It was not with something dead. It was not with these entities. It was something beyond the entities. And so I disagree with this. Go back to the beginning of this study, right? I'm not expounding as much in this particular lecture as I have already because I really don't like beating a dead horse, and that is mostly what this would be. You must not expect to find guidance in these abstruse matters from a set of written instructions, which can be carried about in one's waistcoat pocket. Things are not as simple as that. Well, you can in some ways. One encounters well-intentioned people who ask, how do I distinguish between dream and reality, between fantasy and reality? In the individual case, one should not attempt to distinguish between them in accordance with a fixed rule. The whole soul must be gradually attuned so that it can pass judgment in the individual case. Just as in the external world, we seek to pass judgment irrespective of the individual case. We must develop a wider perspective in order to form a judgment about the particular case. The dream may be a close approximation to reality, but it is not possible in the individual case to state categorically. This is the right and proper way to distinguish a mere dream from reality. Indeed, what I am saying at the moment may not apply in specific cases because other points of view must be taken into consideration. It is important to develop in ourselves the power to discriminate in spiritual matters. That is true. Let us take the familiar case of a person who is dreaming or who imagines he is dreaming. Now it is easy to distinguish between dream and reality. Now it is not easy to distinguish between dream and reality. People who can study dreams today follow in the footsteps of Herr Verworn. He says that one can undertake an interesting experiment. He quotes the following example. Someone taps with a pen on the window of a house where the occupant is asleep. He is dreaming at the time, wakes up and says he heard rifle fire. The dream, according to Verworn, exaggerates. The tapping of the pen on the window pane had become rifle shots. Verworn explains this in the following way. We assume that in waking consciousness the brain is fully active. In dream consciousness the brain activity is diminished. only the peripheral consciousness is active. Normally, the brain plays no part. Its activity is diminished. That is why the dream is so bizarre and why, therefore, the tappings of the pen turn into rifle fire. Now, the public is highly credulous. They are first told, in the relevant passage in Verworn's book, that the dream exaggerates, and then, later on, they are told, not precisely in the words I have used, that the brain is less active, and therefore the dream appears bizarre. The reader has, meanwhile, already forgotten what was told in the first place. He is unable to relate the two statements and simply says, "The state has appointed an expert in these matters, and so we must accept his word." Now, as you know, belief in authority is taboo today. He who does not hold these views about the dream may nonetheless feel that the following way of thinking might well be the right approach. Let us assume you are dreaming of a friend who is dead. You dream, or believe you are dreaming, that you are sharing some situation in common with him, and then you wake up. Your first thought on awakening is, of course, but he died some time ago. But in the dream it never occurred to you that he was dead. Now, you can find many ingenious explanations of this dream if you refer to Verworn's book, The Mechanism of the Spirit. But if this is a dream, and a dream is only a memory of everyday life, you will have difficulty in understanding why the foremost thought in your mind, namely, the death of your friend, plays no part in the dream when you have just experienced a situation which you know for certain you could not have shared with him when alive. You are then justified in saying, "I have now experienced with X something I could not have experienced in life, something that I have not only not experienced, but which would have been impossible in a normal relationship." Assuming that the soul of X, the real soul, which has passed through the gates of death, is behind the dream picture, it is not evident that you do not share his death experience. There is no reason why X's soul should appear to be dead since it lives on. If you take these two factors into consideration, perhaps in conjunction with other factors, you will conclude, my dream picture veils a real meaning with the soul of X. The thought of death never occurs to me because the dream is not a memory of everyday life. In the dream, I receive an authentic visitation from the deceased, an example, X. I now experience the visitation in the form of a dream picture, a situation which could not have arisen under normal circumstances of everyday life. Furthermore, the thought of death never occurs to me because the soul of the deceased persists. And then you have every reason for saying, when I experience this apparent dream, I inhabit a realm where physical memory does not operate, and what I am about to say is most important. For it is characteristic of our physical life that physical memory remains unimpaired. The memory does not exist to the same extent, nor is it of the same nature, in the world of spirit which we enter at death. The memory which we need for the world of spirit we must develop in ourselves. The physical memory is tied to the physical body. Therefore, anyone who is familiar with the supersensible realm knows that the physical memory cannot enter there. It is not surprising that we have no memory of the deceased, but we are aware that we are in communion with the living soul of X. Those who are acquainted with this fact maintain that what we call memory in the physical life is something totally different in the spiritual life. Anyone who has ever succumbed to the impact of Dante's great work, the Divine Comedy, will never doubt, if he has spiritual discernment, that Dante experienced spiritual visions, that he had insight into the world of the spirit. I am going to now direct you to the works of Dante. We have done the Divine Comedy in its entirety, and I take contention with that. Right? I do say that he may not have had spiritual discernment or even spiritual visions. He is a highly imaginative man. It is entirely possible that he did have spiritual visions, but I hold great contention with many of the things that he said, and you should definitely fall back if you do not understand what I am saying. It is way too much to unpack here, but it is largely him explaining to you that you create the hell in which you find yourself in the afterlife, as well as you create the heaven in which you find yourself in the afterlife. He who comprehends the language of those who are familiar with the world of the spirit will find convincing proof of this in Dante's introduction to the Divine Comedy. Dante was well versed in spiritual knowledge. He was no dilettante in matters of the spirit. He was, so to speak, an expert in this field. He was aware that normal memory does not operate in the realm where we are in communion with the dead. He often speaks of the dead, of how the dead dwell in the light. In the Divine Comedy, you will find these beautiful lines on the theme of memory. O light supreme, by mortal thought unscanned, grant that thy former aspect may return once more, a little of thyself relend. Make strong my tongue, that in words may burn one single spark of all thy glory's light for future generations to discern. For if my memory but glimpse the sight whereof these lines would now say a little, men may the better estimate thy might. Thus, Dante was aware that it is impossible with normal memory to grasp that which could originate in the spiritual world. There are many today who ask, why should we aspire to the spiritual world when we have enough to contend with in the physical world? The ordinary man seeks a practical answer to the problems of this life. But have these people any reason to believe that those who were initiated into the mysteries in ancient times were any less concerned with the physical world? The initiates knew that the spiritual world permeates the physical world, and that the dead are unquestionably active among us, even though people deny it. And they knew that this denial merely creates confusion. He who denies that those who have passed through the gates of death exercise an influence on this world resembles the man who says, "Nonsense, I don't believe a word you say." He who denies that those who have passed through the gates of death exercise an influence on the world resembles the man who says, "Nonsense, I don't believe a word you say," and then proceeds to behave as if he did believe it. It is not so easy, of course, to give direct proof of the havoc that is wrought when the influx of the spiritual world into the physical world is not taken into account, when people act on the assumption that this interaction can be ignored. Our epoch shows little inclination to bridge the gap that separates us from the kingdom where the dead and the higher beings dwell. In many respects, our present epoch harbors a veritable antipathy towards the world of the spirit, and it is the duty of the spiritual scientist who is really honest and sincere to be aware of the forces that are hostile to the development of anthroposophy. For there are deep underlying reasons for this hostility, and they stem from the same sources which are responsible for all the forces which are today in active opposition to true progress of mankind. Oh, there's the original notes. In the German text, there is a play upon the word. If pronounced with an open O and a rolled R, it gives the word verloren, a muddle-headed or confused. Okay. And that's going to wrap up Lecture 10 and the entirety of this lesson, in which we did not receive the Mystery of Golgotha. There were a few intimations that this event was pivotal, but it never really described the why thereof, at least in my estimation. Now, some of that may be my preconceived notions, right? I went into this knowing something different and seeing what was the same about what I know in this. And there's not a lot, right? Most of what I know to be true, he is attributing to something else and completely overriding at all. I talk about it maybe even too often, but I have aphantasia. It is one of the ways that I know that I am on the right path. Now, here recently I am overcoming that, right? For the first time I am able to consciously imagine a color. That is something that is completely foreign to me. It is something I have not had for the entirety of my life. But my spiritual experiences, I saw things. I was conscious of my body during the entirety of these experiences. I knew what was going on around me. I wasn't asleep. I was awake. I was in a meditative state in some of them, and in some of them I was not. But I was taken out of my body, but I was still aware of my body. I saw things in my mind's eye when I cannot intentionally see anything with my mind's eye. That is how I am able, in large part, to discern the truth from the fiction. Now, I very rarely dream. It does happen, but it is, generally speaking, something quite vivid and even pertinent to the immediate things about to happen. I don't have the intentional ability to create what I want to be happening from this thing. That sets me apart to where I can know that what I am seeing is not from me. Most of you do not have that ability. And so it is easier for you when you have this experience to attribute it to yourself. I don't have that limitation. That has allowed me to be able to use the Spirit in a way that has affected change in my life. My goal, overarching for these videos, is to relate to you the fact that the spiritual is real. We are experiencing and exploring several different other people's thoughts on that process, but I have already outlined mine. You have to go directly to God with prayer, fasting, and meditation, with a dedication. That doesn't mean you do it once and expect it to happen. It is a process by which it will be revealed to you your own way to discern these things. In the beginning, for most of you, it is going to be your assumption that you are doing it. And that may be true. It is only through continuous practice of prayer, fasting, and meditation that the reality of the situation will be revealed to you. Now, if you have aphantasia like I do, you will understand. If you see something like vividly, consciously, while awake, that is going to be an unusual experience for you. It is going to be something highly disconcerting. You're going to be like, how did that even happen? But it awakens you to the knowledge that these things are real. You can find that otherwise. I have to assume, right? I assume that anything I can do, you can do better. That is my assumption. But it doesn't necessarily have to be true. There are a myriad of things which sets me apart. I'm left-handed. I have aphantasia. Like, there are a bunch of things of that nature. And I am set apart by them in part. But I have to assume that my spirit and your spirit come from the same source, and that anything I can do, you can do too. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult series of topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and that I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but I do not apologize for it. I am here to reveal truths as I discern them, fully granted that that is within me to be wrong. So don't take what I tell you and run with it as fact. Even though I consider it to be fact, test it. Do your own research. Search for your own path. It doesn't have to be mine. The one that I outline has worked for me. Doesn't necessarily mean that it will for you. People think in different ways. Some people are going to need a more sensible way, and some people are going to need a more intuitive way, but you should be able to find it. The spiritual world is real. I have effected change within my own life. I have healed myself in very real ways. And I have to assume that you can do the same. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. And if there is something that you would like to see me talk about in the way that we have done here, leave it in the comments down below, and I will so endeavor. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.